Hey everybody, this is Dan from Mechanical Malarkey. Today I'm going to show you how to replace the inner and outer tie rods on a 2013 to 2017 Honda Accord. I'm replacing these because the inner tie rod is bent, also the boot is torn. It's probably got bent by hitting a curb or pothole. It also bent the sway bar link. I didn't know that the tie rod was bent until I was doing an oil change and was looking over the car, because it was driving straight just fine. It's not that extreme of a bend. This was the front tire at the time, and you can see there's just a little bit of extra wear here at the edge because of the toe being slightly off due to that bent tie rod. I'm going to be replacing the outer tie rod, the inner tie rod, and the boot. You don't have to replace the boot when you're doing the inner tie rod, but you have to take it off, which involves having to get this clamp off, so it might be worth having to replace the entire thing anyway. This one is torn, and that's why I'm replacing it. The most common reasons to replace these parts is one of the joints going bad, or it may have gotten bent by hitting something like a pothole or a curb. Usually it's the inner that bends because the outer is a lot thicker. These are the tools you'll need to replace your tie rods. You need a 14mm wrench, 17mm wrench, 19mm wrench or socket, 24mm wrench, side cutters, preferably long handle if you can get them, some sort of pliers, a hammer, an inner tie rod tool. This one is by Lyle. Doesn't cost too much, but you can probably also rent one from a auto parts store. You also need a breaker bar, and it's good to have a torque wrench. If your new outer tie rod needs to be greased, then you'll need a grease gun too. First, lift and safely support the car on jack stands. Never use just the jack. And then take off the appropriate wheel. Before disconnecting the outer tie rod from the steering knuckle, you want to break the jam nut free. It's a lot harder to do if it's not connected to the steering knuckle. It's a 24mm. Next, take the cotter pin out of the outer tie rod. If it doesn't want to come easily, trick I like to do is grab it with some side cutters and use a hammer to pull it through. Then take the nut off. It's a 19mm. Now to remove the outer tie rod from the knuckle, usually I just hit the knuckle here with a hammer. You could use a pickle fork or ball joint remover tool, but I usually just use a hammer. If you're replacing the outer tie rod, it's okay to hit the end of it with a hammer to get it out of the knuckle. If not, it's best to keep hitting the knuckle instead, because if you hit this too much, you might damage it and not be able to get the nut back on. Now we're just going to spin this off of the inner. If it's rusted on there more, there should be some flats where a wrench will fit on. On this, they're a 17mm. But this is nice and freed up, so I can take it off by hand. You're going to want to count how many turns it takes to remove this, because when you put the new one on, you have to know how far to put it on to be in approximately the same position. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. About 13 to get it off. Next, you'll want to remove the jam nut, because you'll have to get it out of the way to get the boot off. But because I don't need to get the boot off in one piece because it's ripped, I can leave it on. Also because my inner tie rod tool fits around it. Now I will remove the clamp The boot is rusted to the inner tie rod, of course. And because this is already ripped, I'm just going to give a little slice. Now I need to get the inner clamp off, which isn't really removable. You can see a little bit of it sticking out here. So I just reached in and twisted that, and it broke. Now you can remove the whole boot. Remember, if you have to take it off without replacing it, you definitely need to take the jam nut off. Before loosening the inner tie rod, you may have to bend up the tabs on the lock washer. In this case, I was able to get enough force to just overcome that and bend them up as I loosened it. So get your inner tie rod removal tool on the tie rod. Exactly how will vary depending on the tool's design. And loosen it with a breaker bar. Once it's broken free, you can probably spin it by hand. When you're installing the new inner tie rod, you want to put the washer on first, and note the little tabs. They match up with slots on the steering rack. So put that on first, and then screw on the inner tie rod. So I have the new inner tie rod. So then screw that into the rack. Once you've torqued it properly, make sure you fold down the sides of the lock washer so it can't come loose. Well, my camera decided not to record the last few minutes of work. So when you install the new tie rod, torque it to 69 pound-feet if you can. And then put the new boot on and tighten the clamp by squeezing with a pair of side cutters. Worst case scenario, just get a zip tie on there really tight. Then put the outer clamp on. Then put the jam nut on. Something to remember when using aftermarket parts is that the sizes of their fasteners may not always be the same as factory. For instance, this is not a 24, so I'm going to have to use a different wrench to tighten it when I'm all done. And now install the outer tie rod. Remember how many turns it took to take the old one off, which was about 13. So once it actually starts threading, I'll start counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Snug that up for the moment. And put it in the knuckle. Put the nut on. Again, this is definitely not this time it actually is the same size as before. And then put the cotter pin in. And don't forget to tighten the jam nut. If you have the kind with a grease fitting, make sure you install that and grease it. Now, after replacing tie rods, you'll have to take the car to an alignment shop to get a full alignment done. You get it pretty close if you do some measuring of the tires and how they are in relation to each other, but you won't get it perfect unless you go to an actual shop. I hope this video was helpful. If it was, please like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Follow me on social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and read the blog at mechanicalmalarkey.com. Thanks for watching.